Clearly, broad range of issues there.
Thank you.
You won't have any. Give the Galway people all the money.
I'll refer to Cork just briefly at the start. There was an amendment accepted, my own amendment, to ensure that the financial review period is extended to 10 years, specifically with the view to ensuring that Cork County Council. I don't have any role in boundaries through fields. I agree with you that I've always been a supporter of geographic boundaries being boundaries, whether that's a drain or a river or, in the modern context, a motorway or a roadway. But the line was drawn, and some places it goes through fields. It isn't my responsibility, and the line is there now. The services, it's a matter for the implementation group, I suppose. One of the things that this did highlight is the number of functions that local authorities fulfil that often go unheralded. And you spoke about the 400 services, and it is envisaged that they will transfer on or about at the same time. In relation to Galway, I just want to reassure Deputy Connolly that the government is supporting the amendments as are here. So I don't envisage that there will be any need to divide the House on the issue. I'd say to you, I still have my own Oireachtas email, johnpaul.phelan@oireachtas.ie. Send me the UCG report which you referenced. I'd be more than happy to look at it. In relation to other points that have been made by deputies, Deputy O'Keefe spoke about, the original report on the merger in Galway being proposed by some experts. The difference between Galway and Cork is that the Cork report, there was a split, there was a minority report. 3 people were in favour of merger in Cork, 2 were against, and a second investigation was done. In the Galway context, there was unanimous agreement, and unanimous agreement that involved the chief executives of both the city and county councils, as well as the experts. I would say that the chief executives would be experts too, although we live in a time when being an expert is supposed to be a bad thing, I think, nowadays. The list of powers, there's an extensive existing list of functions for municipal districts. It's very haphazard. Deputy O'Keefe is right in his assertion that some local authorities are better at performing some functions than others. And what I have found across the country is some local authorities have a very strong municipal district structure. And those municipal districts are the places where most of the nitty-gritty work of local authorities are done, whether it's roads and footpaths and lights. And some don't have that structure, and the decisions end up all being rehashed again or redebated again at the plenary session of the council, which is one of the reasons why the additional money which I was hoping to give to Galway County Council was targeted specifically at establishing a stronger municipal district structure. There are some local authorities, and I'll provide the details for the deputy afterwards, that have that strong structure in place already, where local decisions are made locally. But I don't want them to be under any illusion that there isn't existing powers. We have a problem in some of our local authorities across the country. There are elected members of all parties and none who don't want powers. Having met the representative groups of the councillors about a month after I was appointed to the position, neither of them could list a single additional power that a local councillor should get. Now, I don't think that's representative of every councillor, but I do think it is an issue that has never been addressed, really. Several people spoke about the merger proposal as it was. The primary driver was never, and I said it at second stage here in the Seanad, was never the issue of efficiency. Efficiency would be expected in a single organisation where 2 now exist. But that was never the primary driver. The primary driver was to have our capital of the West Coast, if you like, with a unitary authority that would be able to cover the unique features that exist in Galway that were referred to by Deputy Fitzmaurice and others. I mean, Fitzmaurice spoke about how the location of Galway and Galway Bay is on one side. The location of Galway is very unusual because the Corrib is on the other, and La Corrib and the Bay produce a city that is almost a figure of 8 kind of in terms of its spread into the rural hinterland, and that figure will change and get bigger, I suppose, over the course of the development of Galway City. I want to reassure all the deputies that on the issue of funding for the local authorities in Galway, I have a very small, and I said it at the previous stage, I say it again, a very small fund of discretionary funding which I propose to put for the next 4 years, half of it into Galway County Council. And my door is still open to Galway County Council to come forward with local government. The discretionary funding is based solely on local government reform. I cannot just give it to any local authority. It has to be based on a proposal for reform. And if the local authorities in Galway have such proposals, then the funding, the funding that was committed to prior to the bill being changed can be delivered. However, if there is no reform proposal, it can't be delivered, because to deliver would be to be illegal. The status of the Mayor of Galway is a matter for the Galway merger bill. It is still the policy of government that bill will be pursued in the second half of the year. Obviously, the first half of this year is going to be largely curtailed in relation to Brexit legislation. But in the second half of this year, that legislation is still being drafted, and it's still a priority for me after the commercial rates bill, which is the next issue that will cross in terms of legislation my own particular desk. The issue also, I think there is some confusion about the mayor, the position of directly elected mayor. In Limerick and in Waterford, it's the people in the city and county that will be voting. I mean, I want to see a directly elected mayor of Leitrim, ultimately, or a chairman of Leitrim County Council, chairperson, chairwoman, and Kilkenny and Wexford and every. You're absolutely right. There should be no Roscommon as well, maybe. But that is what's envisaged in the plebiscite legislation. Cork City is a separate local authority. It's the directly elected mayor of the single authorities in question that people will be asked about in May. That question has been removed in the Galway context, but that is the legitimate decision of the Seanad, which will be agreed to, I'm sure, by the Dáil later. Deputy Murphy spoke about Ballinasloe Town Council and its restoration. The problem I have with town councils, and I've said it previously, is it did allow certain privileged citizens 2 ballot papers in a local election, whereas the rest of us had to survive with 1. And also, you cannot look at a town, wherever it's located, in isolation, which is why I will have a piece of legislation this year also on urban area committees, which is for towns that cross county boundaries. There's hinterlands of towns. It's convenient, I suppose, if they're located in the one local authority, but Ballinasloe is on a boundary too. And you know, the old town council structure took no account of the natural hinterland of the town. And just because you happen to live maybe in an area which had become developed, but wasn't inside the town boundary, you wouldn't get a vote in a town council election. I don't think any Democrat can stand over the issue of the 2 ballot papers, which is why the municipal district structure should, and I fully intend on reinforcing it even further into the future. Deputy Kine spoke about the funding gap that had emerged. Other deputies spoke about it too. Just to again say to the House, Galway County Council is not the furthest away from the average funding received in the country in the context of the 31 local authorities. There is a piece of work which is largely be completed in the local government section, but is not completed by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in relation to the local property tax. The mechanism, the model that existed with over 100 different variables for distributing the local government fund was far too complicated and outdated. It hasn't been finalised yet in terms of the new allocation model, but it is my intention to ask the government to introduce a new model which will be based on 5 variables, and one of the variables will be how far the local authority in question is away from the average funding. So in other words, to bridge over a period of time that funding gap for all of the underfunded and less funded local authorities across the country, not just Galway. And I would very much hope, and it would be very, I suppose, important for the Galway merger legislation that we would have clarity and a decision from government on the new local government fund allocation model before the Galway merger legislation comes before the House. The issue, and it's been said by several members in Galway, about the appointment of a joint chief executive. It's exactly the same measure that was included for Limerick, Waterford and Tipperary. I would urge members who have colleagues and friends who represent Tipperary and Waterford and Limerick to ask them the influence that the mergers have had. They were resisted at the time. I think the feedback from Limerick is quite positive now. The feedback from Waterford is the same. Tipperary is different because it wasn't the merger of a city council and a county council. It was 2 separate counties under local government terms being merged into one county, which we all know as Tipperary, and one local authority. But I do think Deputy O'Keefe's point about a process of analysing what has happened is a fair question, and I'll endeavour to have such work done. Deputy Fitzmaurice spoke about the funding of, spoke about roads funding and other matters that are, some of which are outside of my own control. But if Galway County Council have a proposal for strengthening their municipal district, that discretionary fund is still there. It hasn't been allocated. And I would be more than favourable towards doing it. But, you know, I won't be drawing it up for them. But the fund is still there for them to access. You did say one thing, Deputy Fitzmaurice, which I want to disagree with. I don't think you were talking about Cork. Nobody wanted to hold up Cork. Well, there was a good chunk of members who are not here now who did want to hold up the expansion of Cork. Not you, and not any of the other members present, but we had at committee and report and second stage several members in the House who opposed, but legitimately, it's legitimate to oppose something. We live in an age now where everyone is expected to agree about everything, but it's a legitimate tactic, both parliamentary and otherwise, not to agree on particular issues. I think I've addressed most of the questions. Government is accepting these 3 amendments, will be returning with a bill on the Galway merger in the second half of the year. I'm more than open to Galway County Council, or indeed City Council, looking for discretionary funding for necessary reforms of local government that would, I suppose, allow access to that reform fund, but also ensure that the funding situation, particularly in the county, could be improved in the short term. But there is a longer term funding solution which I hope can be agreed in the not too distant future. Thank you.